As some of you may know, my undergraduate and high school years were spent participating in the world of competitive forensics. Speech and debate as it's known by others. Along with the basics of rhetoric, presentation, and argumentation, one of the most common observations made if you were to ever participate watching rounds of public forum or Lincoln Douglas-style debates is the outcry and attack of one opponent's use of logical fallacies. While not nearly as common as it once was, especially in the development of more complex styles of argumentation and debate meta, both from judges and competitors alike, calling out the use of fallacy is still common in our modern-day political discourse. The most common in my observation is the use of, and the calling out of, the slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope argument, or fallacy as it's known, is used quite often in modern-day political discourse. Senator Elizabeth Warren invoked the argument in the discussion of the Trump tax policy passed at the beginning of his administration, saying that the passage of the tax law would inevitably lead to thousands of people dying. The right wing has historically used this on social issues, the most prominent being, recently, on gay marriage, an area of discussion which I want to delve into later in this video. So what is the slippery slope argument? The slippery slope argument, or logical fallacy, is defined as the argument of intended or unintended consequences of the subject of policy, resolution, or proposition in a debate. It is often cited as a logical fallacy, a deductive argument held in bad faith, or, at the very least, an argument used in the point of fear-mongering amongst the public discourse. It is seen as a relatively small first step that will lead or trigger a chain of events that leads to what is seen by the holder of the argument as inevitably negative consequences. Now, there are typically two kinds of slippery slope arguments: rational grounds and empirically based. Rational ground slippery slope arguments assume that a distinction cannot be made between A, the object under consideration, and B, the object of comparison. These arguments rely on the idea that there is no non-arbitrary stopping place anywhere along the slope. Typically, such arguments maintain that there are no important differences between A and M and N, and the clearly objectionable B. On the other hand, empirical slippery slope arguments assume that while differences between A and B exist, A should nevertheless be prohibited, on the grounds that allowing it would increase the likelihood of our allowing each successive case further down the slope, until we have finally reached some objectionable result. With those definitions out of the way, I want to pay close attention to the empirics-based slippery slope argument. It will be a valued and applicable definition for today's discussion on the issue. As I had mentioned earlier, I want to look back on the slippery slope arguments made, and the calling of these arguments fallacies, during the years leading up to the legalization of gay marriage in the United States in 2015, and see where we are on both a legal and cultural front. Now, I can already hear what would be the biggest and arguably most justifiable objection to this interrogation of ideas. The prudentialist. Don't you know that you're engaging in post hoc rationalization? For a gentleman discussing fallacies and a background in polemics, aren't you aware of the almighty phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc? Ah, yes. The fallacy of because Y followed X, X must be the cause of Y. An issue of questioning causality. Well, I don't want you to worry, dear listener. I'm not claiming that because gay marriage happened in the United States, the state of America's moral and social culture is where it is today because of it. To argue that ignores too many variables: decades of the culture war, marches, films, and other avenues of political discourse on social issues across the country. Now, do I think that the legalization of gay marriage in 2015 was a tipping point for social and cultural accelerationism amongst social progressives? Yes. But we can look to the past for an empirical slippery slope that applies to the slippery slope arguments of social conservatives surrounding gay marriage. The social and religious rights arguments, while some presented from a legal standpoint, were innately based on a moral and cultural one. The slippery slope arguments, often discredited by the progressive social left as fear-mongering fallacies, in today's modern culture have proven to be true. Again, this is not a post hoc position I'm going to trap myself into, as I am specifically arguing from the following position, on how law is molded and shaped by the cultural and societal norms. I present the following three positions as to how law is changed and how law is formed. 1. Law is based on the moral and social order of a people and culture. Our inherent positions based on intuition and desire for social standing assist in the formalization of law. 2. Changes in the culture and moral consensus of a people inevitably lead to a change in law. As the consensus changes, the desire to maintain social desirability encourages change and sway of opinion. 3. Changes to the moral and social order establishes precedent for future justification for further changes to the current law and social and cultural consensus, allowing for a future where society is more amicable to future change. With these points in mind as to how culture and the social consensus changes and changes law, let's look back to a different legal argument on another contemporary political issue, illustrating that changes in law are brought through change in social and cultural consensus. In Griswold v. Connecticut, a 1965 Supreme Court case that legalized the use of a married couple's right to use contraception, Justice Hugo Black in oral arguments, as I paraphrase here, argued that the logic of the right to privacy in order to have access to the right to the use of contraceptives would be used to abandon the legal and social punishment in laws that have banned abortion. Eugene Volokh, a professor at the UCLA School of Law, wrote in the Hofstra Law Review in 2005 the following, and I quote, "Yet in only 7 years after Griswold, in Einstadt v. Bard, the court relied on Griswold to hold that unmarried couples have a right to use contraceptives. The following year, the court used Griswold and Bard as the foundations for recognizing a right to an abortion, over the dissent of Justice White, who must have then realized that Justice Black's slippery slope worry was prescient. And in the recent Lawrence v. Texas, the court used Griswold as the most pertinent beginning point for its decision to strike down laws banning homosexual conduct. So, the court has been willing to depart from the very core of Griswold's argument, the limitation to marriage, from the express assurances by the concurrence that the decision in no way interferes with bans on homosexuality, from Justice White's assurance at oral arguments that abortion posed a rather different problem from contraception. This willingness understandably makes people wonder what other steps there will be along this path, especially if courts take another big step in finding a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Now, the social and religious right had a valid legal precedent of events, even if the logic for married couples and contraception had been then applied to an unmarried woman wanting abortions was either temporal or causal in nature. Even if not causal, we can look at the decision of Obergefell v. Hodges and what followed through a lens of the slippery slope argument empirically based, as we have the empirical proof from the decisions of Griswold, coupled with the growing social changes that led to an amicability in the logic for the decisions that followed, using the logic of the Griswold case to others, such as Roe, Bard, and Lawrence. This logic was often present in right-wing arguments against the legalization of same-sex marriage, that the social and religious right were not arguing from a legal standpoint, but rather the law's willingness to change along with the social order that would inevitably lead to future legal changes to other situations and issues found morally objectionable to that section of the right wing. That the slippery slope proposed in opposition to same-sex marriage had a historical, empirical-based argument to back up their claim. With that said, what were some of the arguments in the decades leading up to Obergefell v. Hodges that were in response to the social and evangelical conservatives in the United States? What 2 men or 2 women do in the privacy of their own homes is none of your concerns. Now, where have we heard that one before? The concept of traditional marriage has changed over time. It is not explicitly for a mechanism of raising a family and procreation. I'll touch on this later. This isn't going to be leading to the legalization of polygamy, pedophilia, or incest. That's a slippery slope fallacy. But here we are. Now, I'm not going to be going back and forth on arguments either for or against gay marriage. I don't want to rehash the early 2000s. However, it is important to note that the previous arguments listed are a consequence of the changing and evolving social order that is once again more amicable to the change of legal and social norms of the country. Even the appeal to religious authority from right-wingers leading up to Obergefell v. Hodges failed as a product of rapid secularization of the West. I'm not saying that secularization is inherently a negative thing, as it provides a different epistemological perspective when asking difficult or scientific questions. But it is clear to see in the last 5 years, we have seen a rampant acceleration of the social and legal amicability that pushes the social order and culture further down the gradient of the slippery slope, to new positions, social causes, and an argument for more rights and protections, essentially confirming the fears of the social right that were so often contemptuously decried by the left. Which brings us back to the slippery slope, both as a concept and argument. The cultural acceptance and thus legalization of gay marriage, A, has led to objectionable and unintended consequences, B. Now, I am not saying it is the cause, but rather the tipping point to accelerate and normalize other aspects that may have been previously seen as objectionable by the general public and the non-politically informed. This is not some argument about the gay agenda. All political, social, and cultural groups have agenda and pursue these interests in a plural democratic society. Are some of these agendas and groups co-opted by power structures, i.e. the cathedral, that can be used to further their own entrenchment of power? Yes, which can prompt accelerationism or the unintended consequences of the original agenda's holders, proposals, and positions. All social and political groups, especially dissident groups, must be mindful of unintended consequences or the possibility of being co-opted. But from 2015 on, we have seen the following. Consideration of the legalization and decriminalization of polygamy. In the state of Utah, where polygamy was the very item preventing the state from entering the union, which in this year effectively proposed that multiple marriages would not be a problem for criminal prosecution. However, laws against bigamy are still on the books, which prevents these marriages from being legally recognized. While I am aware of Utah's Mormon history and population, the argument from John Roberts' dissent in Obergefell stands to reason that the logic of the right to marry would lead to the propositions of polygamy that we are now seeing in 2020. While not necessarily polygamy, an ordinance recognizing multiple partners was passed in Somerville, Massachusetts earlier this year, granting the same marriage rights such as the transfer of insurance benefits and hospital visits to polyamorous relationship groups. Along with the slope being accelerated further down the gradient post-Obergefell, there has been a massive spike in the terms of polyamory, transgender, and pedophilia within the last 5 years, according to Google Trends. It is indicative that the legalization of gay marriage, seen by so many as this milestone hurdle, a legal Everest of the LGBT community, brought forward the acceptance and in turn potential consequences listed by the right wing. Not the cause, but a flag to way forward on other issues previously found objectionable. These issues range from the question of polyamorous relationships to Drag Queen Story Hour, which was established in San Francisco in 2015, and now in 2020 has over 50 registered charter places within their organization at the time of recording this video. Along with this, we are seeing the creeping march along the social left, recently in the last 5 years, of the term minor attracted person, in an attempt to normalize pedophilia. Now, this is nothing new, as French postmodernists and queer theorists ranging from Gail Rubin to Judith Butler have had a cozy relationship with the concept of minors and prepubescent children engaging in sexual relationships with adults. And while the LGBT community has bore this cross for some time, even before gay marriage was the battleground, the culture has once again become, or is at least pushing for it to become, another aspect of the community for normalization. This is right on the heels of California's recent changes to state law giving judges leniency on the subject of engaging in sexual acts with a minor and being listed on the sex offender registry. In the name of the LGBT being unfairly discriminated in these instances, to where now a 24-year-old male can engage in sexual acts with a 14-year-old boy, and the judge now has the leniency to not put that man on the registry. We have moved further down the grade of the slope. Even attempts to persuade against these claims of the slope and social and cultural shifts would happen. Mr. Jonathan Rauch writes in Politico magazine in a 2015 op-ed. Rauch argued that polygamy would not be the next big legal battle in the wake of the gay marriage decision, as societies that have polygamous relationships have higher rates of kidnapping, murder, and rape, things that don't belong in a civilized society. Rauch states that institutionalized monogamy shifted the mindset from wife-seeking to long-term planning, paternal investment, and long-term planning leading to higher levels of productivity and economic growth. I hope that the irony isn't lost on you. And from 2015 onward, what we've seen is the acceleration I've mentioned above. So what does this all mean? That the slippery slope is a valid point of argumentation if arguing from a point of empiricism in a historical context. The longevity of this argument is indicative that it should not be easily dismissed when presented against major societal change. Societies, political groups, and those who push and succeed for landmark victories within their social and cultural causes to change the social and moral order often lead to accelerationism. Based on the three principal observations as to how the law is formed, molded, and changed throughout time and culture, it is important for all organizations, political movements, and groups to be concerned that their ideas and propositions may be co-opted by the established power structure, and that the potential for unintended consequences by their positions and ideas may very well happen. While I've covered an item that justifies the right's use of the slippery slope argument, other ideas on the right may very well receive the same treatment. Vigilance is required as we argue our ideals and policies, as changes to the culture and moral order can quickly lead to avenues of change that give your opposition exactly the kind of ammunition they need. And on top of all of this, we owe the religious and social right one huge apology. Thanks for watching.